picture this. It's 1917. The Great War has torn Europe apart. Snow falls like tears from a grey sky over a grand English manor, and in that snow, a broken hero lies dying, while the world around him stays silent. But today, I'm going to tell you a story that will make your heart race and your eyes fill with tears. A story of love that breaks all rules. A story of two souls who found each other in the darkest hour of human history. This is the tale of Captain James Whitmore and Elara, a love so powerful it changed everything. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will shock you. December 1917. The war has been raging for 3 long bloody years. Captain James Whitmore was once the pride of the British Army, tall, strong, with eyes as blue as summer skies. He led his men through hell itself at the Battle of Passchendaele. But war takes everything from everyone. The explosion came without warning. A German shell landed right next to James and his unit. When the smoke cleared, 12 good men lay dead. And James opened his eyes to complete darkness. The doctors tried everything. "I'm sorry, Captain," the army doctor said, his voice heavy with sadness. "The shrapnel damaged your optic nerves. You'll never see again. Never see again." Imagine hearing those words when you're only 28 years old. James came home to Whitmore Manor, his family's estate in the English countryside. But he wasn't the same man who left. He walked with a cane now, feeling his way through rooms that used to be as familiar as his own heartbeat. His mother, Lady Margaret Whitmore, hired the best servants money could buy, but James pushed everyone away. "Leave me alone," he would shout when servants tried to help him eat. "I don't need your pity." He spent his days locked in his room, drinking whiskey and cursing his fate. The brave captain who once saved hundreds of lives now couldn't even find his way to the bathroom without help. But fate had other plans. Her name was Elara Rose. She was 22 years old, with hair as dark as midnight and eyes like warm honey. But Elara had never spoken a single word in her entire life. She was born mute. The doctor said there was nothing wrong with her throat or tongue. Sometimes, he explained to her mother, the mind just chooses silence. Elara's family was poor. Very poor. When she was 18, she came to work at Whitmore Manor as a kitchen maid. She scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and cleaned rooms. The other servants barely noticed her. That quiet girl, they called her. Strange one, isn't she? But Elara wasn't strange. She was watching. Always watching. She saw everything. The cook stealing sugar, the butler drinking Lord Whitmore's wine, the young maids gossiping about the master's son. And when Captain James came home broken and angry, Elara saw something else. She saw pain. Not just in his body, but in his soul. The other servants were afraid of him now. "He throws things when he's angry," whispered Mary, the head maid. "Yesterday he broke 3 plates, said Thomas, the footman. "Poor man," sighed Mrs. Henderson, the cook. "But someone needs to take care of him." Nobody wanted that job. Nobody except Elara. Lady Margaret was desperate. "Please," she begged Elara one snowy morning, "just bring him his meals, clean his room. The others won't go near him anymore." Elara nodded. She always nodded. Words weren't needed when your heart spoke loud enough. December 15th, 1917. The day everything changed. Elara knocked softly on James's door. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. She pushed the door open slowly. The room smelled of whiskey and sadness. Heavy curtains blocked out all the light. Not that it mattered to James anymore. He was sitting in his chair by the cold fireplace, still wearing the same clothes from 3 days ago. His hair was messy, his face covered with stubble. This wasn't the proud captain in the family portraits downstairs. "Go away," he said without turning around. "I don't want breakfast. I don't want anything." But Elara didn't leave. She never left when someone needed help. She placed the breakfast tray on the table and walked quietly to the fireplace. She had brought wood from downstairs. Within minutes, warm orange flames were dancing in the hearth. James turned his head toward the sound. "I said go away. Who are you anyway?" "You're not Mary." Elara wanted to answer, but she couldn't. Instead, she walked to the window and pulled open the curtains. Bright winter sunlight flooded the room. "Close those," James shouted, standing up quickly. Too quickly. He forgot about the table next to his chair. His shin hit it hard, and he stumbled forward. Lara rushed to catch him, but James fell anyway. His hands hit the stone hearth, and blood started flowing from deep cuts on his palms. "Damn it all to hell," James cursed, trying to push himself up, but his cut hands couldn't support his weight. Most people would have run for help, called for the doctor, screamed for Lady Margaret. But Elara wasn't like most people. She knelt beside him in the silence. Gently, so gently, she took his bleeding hands in hers. James froze. "What are you doing? Don't touch me." But her touch wasn't like the others. It wasn't full of pity or fear. Her hands were warm, soft, and careful. She examined his cuts like she was holding something precious. "Let go of me," James whispered, but his voice had lost its anger. Elara tore strips from her own apron and began cleaning his wounds. Her touch was so gentle that James barely felt any pain. She worked in complete silence, wrapping his hands with the skill of someone who had cared for many injuries before. When she finished, James's hands were bandaged perfectly. Clean, dry, safe. "Why?" James asked quietly. "Why aren't you afraid of me like the others?" Elara looked at his face. Really looked at him. His eyes were still beautiful, even though they couldn't see. They were the color of storms over the ocean. And in those stormy eyes, she saw the same loneliness that lived in her own heart. She touched his cheek. Just once, so softly it felt like a whisper. Then she stood up, picked up the breakfast tray, and left. James sat there on the floor for a long time, touching the spot where her hand had been. The next morning, Elara came back, and the morning after that, and every morning for 2 weeks. She never spoke, but she spoke volumes. She brought him fresh clothes and helped him dress without making him feel helpless. She guided his hand to show him where everything was on his breakfast tray. She read to him from the newspaper, her finger following the words on the page as if he could see them. Wait, how did she read to him if she couldn't speak? Elara was clever. Very clever. She had learned to read by watching the cook follow recipes, and she found other ways to communicate. She would tap once for yes, twice for no. She would place his hand on different objects to show him what she meant. She would guide him around the room, teaching him where everything was located. "You're teaching me to live again," James said one morning as she helped him shave. "But I don't even know your name." Elara smiled. She took his hand and traced letters on his palm with her finger. Elara. Elara, James repeated slowly. "That's beautiful. It means bright star in Latin, doesn't it?" She squeezed his hand. "Yes. And you can't speak at all?" 2 squeezes. "No." James was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made Elara's heart skip a beat. "You know what, Elara? You don't need words. You say more in your silence than most people say in a lifetime." From that day on, they developed their own language. Hand squeezes, gentle touches, the way she moved around the room. James began to read her moods by the sound of her footsteps. Light, quick steps meant she was happy. Slow, careful steps meant she was worried about something. And when she was sad, she moved like a ghost. "Tell me about yourself," James said one afternoon as she arranged flowers by his bedside. She had brought them from the garden, winter roses that somehow survived the cold. Elara took his hand and began to trace her story on his skin. Her father died when she was young. Her mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. She had 2 younger brothers who needed her help. "That's why you're so good at taking care of people," James said softly. "You've been doing it your whole life." She placed his hand over her heart. He could feel it beating fast. "Elara," James whispered, I think I'm falling in love with you." The room went completely silent. Even the wind outside seemed to stop blowing. Then Elara did something she had never done before. She took James's hand and placed it on her lips. Then she pressed those lips to his palm in the gentlest kiss. It was her way of saying, "I love you too." But love stories are never simple, especially not in 1917. Lady Margaret discovered their secret on a cold January morning. She walked into James's room without knocking and found Elara braiding his hair. They were sitting together on his bed, laughing about something. James was laughing. Her broken, angry son was actually laughing. "What is the meaning of this?" Lady Margaret's voice cut through the room like ice. Elara jumped up quickly, but James stayed calm. "Mother," he said, "this is Elara. She's been taking care of me." "Taking care of you?" Lady Margaret's voice rose higher. "She's a servant, a mute servant." "She's the woman I love," James said firmly. Lady Margaret gasped. "James Whitmore, you will not disgrace this family. You're a war hero, a captain. You can't possibly think you could marry the most wonderful woman I've ever met." James stood up, his hand finding Elara's arm. "Yes, Mother, that's exactly what I think. This is ridiculous." Lady Margaret was shouting now. "She can't even speak. How would you introduce her to society? What would people say?" "I don't care what people say." "Well, I do. Elara, you're dismissed. Pack your things and leave this house immediately." "No." James stepped in front of Elara. "She's not going anywhere." But Elara touched his arm gently. When he turned to her, she shook her head. She pointed to herself, then to the door, then squeezed his hand twice. No. She was saying no, she wouldn't stay and cause problems for him. "Elara, please," James begged, but she was already walking toward the door. She stopped and looked back at him one last time. The look in her eyes said everything. "I love you. I'll always love you. But I won't destroy your life." Then she was gone. James stood there, reaching toward empty air. "Elara, Elara." But for the first time since she'd entered his life, his voice was met with only silence. The next 3 weeks were the longest of James's life. He stopped eating, stopped shaving, stopped getting out of bed. He had learned to live again, and now he had to learn to survive without his reason for living. "Please, James," Lady Margaret begged. "I found you a lovely girl, Charlotte Pemberton. She's from a good family, and she doesn't mind that you can't see." "Get out," James said quietly. "She's coming for tea this afternoon. At least meet her. Get out." Lady Margaret left, but she didn't give up. She invited Charlotte anyway. Charlotte Pemberton was everything a proper English lady should be. Beautiful, well-educated, from a wealthy family. She spoke French and played piano. She was perfect. She was also completely wrong for James. "Oh, Captain Whitmore, Charlotte gushed when she met him. "You're so brave, fighting for our country even though you can't see. How inspiring." James wanted to throw something. Charlotte talked about his blindness like it was a cute pet trick. "Tell me about the war," she continued. "It must have been so exciting." Exciting? Watching his friends die was exciting. Meanwhile, Elara had returned to her mother's tiny cottage. She helped take care of her brothers, did washing for neighbors, anything to earn money, but every night she cried herself to sleep. She would trace James's name on her pillow in the dark. She would remember the way he laughed when she tickled his chin while shaving him. She would think about his hands, always searching for hers. Her mother noticed her sadness. "What's wrong, my dear?" she asked in sign language. Elara's family had learned basic signs to communicate with her. Elara signed back, "I fell in love with someone I can never have." "The young master at the manor?" Elara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my child," her mother said softly, "love doesn't care about rich or poor, but the world isn't always ready for love." One night, Elara couldn't take it anymore. She put on her coat and walked through the snow to Whitmore Manor. She didn't plan to go inside. She just wanted to see his window, to know he was safe. But when she got there, she saw something that broke her heart. Through the window, she could see James with Charlotte. Charlotte was playing piano while James sat in his chair, looking miserable. Lady Margaret was smiling and clapping. They were planning his future, a future without her. Elara pressed her hand against the cold window. "Be happy," she whispered in her mind. "Please be happy, even if it's not with me." She turned to leave and slipped on the ice. Her head hit the stone path hard. Blood began pooling in the white snow. And that's where our story takes its most dramatic turn. James felt it before anyone else noticed. He was sitting with Charlotte, barely listening to her endless chatter about her new dress, when suddenly he felt wrong, like part of his soul was in danger. "Excuse me," he said, standing up abruptly. "James?" Lady Margaret looked concerned. "Where are you going?" "I need some air, but it's snowing, and you can't." "I can manage." James grabbed his cane and headed for the door. Something was pulling him outside. He couldn't explain it. It was like an invisible rope was tied around his heart, dragging him toward the garden. He stepped out into the cold night air. Snow was falling heavily now, and the wind was getting stronger. "Hello?" he called out. "Is someone there?" No answer. But that feeling in his chest was getting stronger. Something was wrong, very wrong. He began walking carefully down the path, using his cane to guide him. His foot hit something soft. He knelt down and felt around in the snow. His hand touched fabric, then skin, cold skin. "Oh God," he whispered. "Help, help, someone's hurt." But the wind was too loud. No one inside the house could hear him. James felt along the person's body. Small frame, long hair, a familiar dress. "Elara," he whispered. "Elara." She was unconscious, bleeding from her head, her body growing cold in the snow. James tried to lift her, but he couldn't manage it alone. Not with his cane, not in the dark. "Stay with me," he begged, pulling off his coat to cover her. "Please, Elara, stay with me." He held her head in his lap, trying to stop the bleeding with his hands. His own hands were freezing, but he didn't care. "I'm so sorry," he whispered to her still. "I should have fought harder for you. I should have told Mother that losing you was worse than losing my sight." The snow was falling harder now. James couldn't feel his fingers anymore, but he wouldn't let go of Elara. "If you die," he told her, unconscious form, "I will die too. Do you understand me? I can't live in this world without you." That's when he made a decision that would change everything. James began to drag himself and Elara toward the house, inch by inch through the snow. He couldn't see where he was going. He couldn't feel his hands or feet, but he had to save her. James, Lady Margaret's voice came from somewhere behind him. James, what on earth? Oh my God. Finally, help arrived. Thomas and 2 other servants rushed out to carry Elara inside. The doctor was called immediately, but James collapsed right there in the snow. The cold, the exhaustion, the terror of almost losing Elara, it was too much. His body simply gave up. Both James and Elara lay unconscious in Whitmore Manor for 3 days. The doctor worked on Elara first. She has a severe concussion, he told Lady Margaret, and she's been exposed to the cold for too long. I'm not sure if she'll wake up. And my son, pneumonia. His lungs are filling with fluid. The next 24 hours will tell us everything. Lady Margaret sat between their 2 rooms, not knowing which way to turn. She had tried to keep them apart, and now she might lose them both. On the second night, James woke up first. Elara was the first word out of his mouth. Where is she? James, thank God. Lady Margaret rushed to his bedside. You're awake. Where is Elara? He asked again, trying to sit up. She's in the room next door, James. She's very sick. I have to see her. You can't even stand. But James was already swinging his legs out of bed. He fell immediately, but he started crawling toward the door. James, stop! You'll hurt yourself. Then help me, James said firmly. Help me get to her, or I'll crawl there myself. Lady Margaret had never seen her son so determined. Even when he went off to war, he hadn't looked this fierce. All right, she said quietly. All right. She helped James to the next room, where Elara lay pale and still in the bed. Her head was bandaged, and her breathing was very shallow. James felt for her hand. When he found it, it was cold. Too cold. She's dying, isn't she? He asked. Lady Margaret couldn't lie to him. The doctor isn't hopeful. James squeezed Elara's hand. Elara, can you hear me? It's James, I'm right here. No response. I know you think you're protecting me by staying away, James continued. But you're wrong. Nothing in this world matters if you're not in it. Still nothing. James leaned closer to her ear. Remember when you taught me to shave myself? You guided my hand so carefully. Remember when you showed me where all the furniture was? You never let me bump into anything. He was crying now. You taught me that being blind doesn't mean being helpless. You showed me that love doesn't need words. You saved my life, Elara. Now let me save yours. Lady Margaret watched her son pour his heart out to the unconscious girl. She began to understand something she had missed before. This wasn't just attraction. This wasn't just loneliness. This was the kind of love that poets write about. The kind of love that changes everything. James, she said softly, if she wakes up, if she gets better, you have my blessing. James looked up in shock. Mother? I was wrong, Lady Margaret admitted. I thought I was protecting our family's reputation. But family isn't about reputation. It's about love. And that girl, she loves you more than her own life. James turned back to Elara. Did you hear that? He whispered. Mother says yes. We can be together, but you have to wake up first. As if she heard him, Elara's fingers moved slightly in his hand. Elara, James held his breath. Her eyes fluttered open. When she saw James beside her bed, tears began streaming down her face. Don't cry, James said, laughing and crying at the same time. You're safe. We're both safe. Elara tried to sit up, but she was too weak. Instead, she brought James's hand to her lips and kissed it softly. It was her way of saying, I'm never leaving you again. Spring came early to Whitmore Manor that year. Elara recovered slowly but completely. The doctor said it was a miracle. Her will to live had been stronger than her injuries. James recovered too. Not just from his pneumonia, but from his anger and sadness. Having Elara back gave him a reason to smile again. Lady Margaret kept her promise. She welcomed Elara into the family like a daughter. She even started learning basic sign language so she could communicate with her future daughter-in-law. "I want to apologize," Lady Margaret told Elara one morning. "I judged you unfairly. You're the best thing that ever happened to my son." Elara hugged her warmly. Actions always spoke louder than words anyway. But James was planning something special. Something that would require all of his newfound confidence. On a beautiful morning in May, James asked Elara to walk with him in the garden. The roses were blooming, and the air smelled like hope. "Elara," James said, as they sat on the stone bench where she used to bring him flowers, "I need to ask you something important." Elara squeezed his hand to show she was listening. "I know I can't see your face," James continued. "I know I can't give you all the things other men could give you. I can't drive you places or read to you or even see how beautiful you look in a wedding dress." Elara placed her hand on his cheek. She shook her head. "Those things didn't matter. But I can promise you this," James went on. "I can promise to love you with every breath in my body. I can promise to listen to every word you don't say. I can promise to need you every single day for the rest of my life." James pulled out a small box from his pocket. His hands were shaking as he opened it. "This was my grandmother's ring," he said. "Mother gave it to me this morning," she said. "Grandmother would have loved you." The ring was simple but beautiful. A single diamond surrounded by smaller stones that sparkled in the sunlight. "Elara rose," James said, getting down on one knee despite not being able to see her reaction. "Will you marry me? Will you be my voice when I need words? Will you be my eyes when I need to see? Will you let me be your voice when the world needs to hear your heart?" Elara was crying so hard she couldn't breathe. She pulled James to his feet and kissed him with all the love she had stored up in her silent heart. When they finally broke apart, she took his hand and traced letters on his palm. Y-E-S. Y-E-S. James laughed and spun her around in his arms. "She said yes," he shouted to the whole world. "She said yes." From the house, Lady Margaret watched through the window and smiled. Finally, her son was truly home. The wedding was the most beautiful event Whitmore Manor had ever seen. Lady Margaret spared no expense. She filled the gardens with thousands of white roses and lilies. She hired the best musicians in England. She invited everyone from miles around. But the most beautiful part wasn't the decorations or the fancy food. It was the love that filled every corner of that place. Elara wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit perfectly. Lady Margaret had insisted on hiring the finest seamstress in London. Every bride deserves to feel like a princess on her wedding day, Lady Margaret told Elara as she helped her get ready. "And you, my dear, are going to be the most beautiful princess anyone has ever seen." Elara looked at herself in the mirror. The dress was made of ivory silk, with tiny pearls sewn into the bodice. The veil was made of the finest lace. She had never imagined she could look so elegant. But more than that, she had never imagined she could be so happy. James was nervous as he waited at the altar. He couldn't see the decorations or the guests, but he could feel the love in the air. "You look terrified," Thomas whispered. Thomas was James's best man, the same servant who had once been afraid to enter his room. "What if she changes her mind?" James whispered back. "What if she realizes she could do better?" "Sir," Thomas said seriously, "that girl walked through a blizzard just to make sure you were all right. She nearly died trying to see you one more time." She's not going anywhere. When the music started, James felt his heart stop. He knew Elara was walking down the aisle toward him. He wished more than anything that he could see her face. But then she was beside him, and he could smell her perfume, roses, just like always. He could feel her happiness radiating from her like warmth from a fire. The pastor began the ceremony. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of James Alexander Whitmore and Elara Rose Miller. When it came time for the vows, James spoke first. Elara, he said, his voice strong and clear, you found me when I was lost. You healed me when I was broken. You loved me when I couldn't love myself. I promised to spend every day of my life trying to deserve the gift of your love. Then it was Elara's turn. Of course, she couldn't speak her vows out loud, but Lady Margaret had helped her prepare something special. Elara took James's hands and began to trace her vows on his palms, just like she had traced her name that first day. I promise to be your voice when you need words. I promise to be your strength when you feel weak. I promise to love you in silence and in sound, in darkness and in light, in sickness and in health, for all the days of my life. James felt every word as if it were written on his heart. When the pastor said, "You may kiss the bride," James cupped Elara's face in his hands. "Hello, Mrs. Whitmore," he whispered. Their kiss was soft, gentle, and full of promise. And when they broke apart, every single person in that garden was crying happy tears. 6 months after their wedding, Elara had a surprise for James. She had been feeling sick in the mornings and tired during the day. At first, she thought she was just working too hard around the house. But when her symptoms continued, Lady Margaret insisted she see the doctor. The news was the most wonderful surprise of all. "How do I tell him?" Elara asked Lady Margaret in sign language after the doctor left. "However you want to, my dear," Lady Margaret smiled. "But I think he's going to be the happiest man in England." That evening, Elara led James to their favorite spot in the garden. It was a warm October evening, and the last roses of the season were still blooming. "You seem excited about something," James said, sitting beside her on their bench. "Your footsteps have been light all day." Elara took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. James looked confused. "Elara, what are you—" Then understanding dawned on his face. His eyes grew wide with wonder. Are we?" He couldn't finish the sentence. Elara squeezed his hand once. "Yes." James let out a whoop of joy that could be heard all the way back at the house. He picked Elara up and spun her around, then set her down gently as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he whispered. "We're having a baby." He knelt down and pressed his ear to her stomach. "Hello in there, little one," he said softly. "This is your daddy. I can't wait to meet you." Elara ran her fingers through his hair, watching his face light up with pure joy. This man who had once thought his life was over was now planning a future filled with hope. "I love you," James said, looking up at her. "I love you so much I think I might explode." Elara laughed silently and helped him to his feet. Then she took his face in her hands and kissed him with all the love in her heart. They were going to be a family. A real family, built on love, not duty or expectations. It was everything either of them had ever dreamed of. But even the greatest love stories face their darkest hours. When Elara was 7 months pregnant, the Spanish flu arrived in their village. It started small. A few people in town getting sick, but within weeks it was spreading like wildfire. Entire families were dying. The local doctor was overwhelmed. "We need to leave," Lady Margaret told James urgently. "Go to the house in Scotland until this passes." "We can't leave," James replied. "These people need help. Elara has been making medicine for the sick families. We can't abandon them now. It was true. Elara had learned about healing herbs from her mother. When people in the village started getting sick, she immediately started preparing remedies and taking them to families who couldn't afford a doctor. James, think about the baby, Lady Margaret pleaded. I am thinking about the baby, James said firmly. I'm thinking about the world I want our child to grow up in. A world where people help each other, not a world where the rich run away when the poor need them. So they stayed. Elara continued making her medicines, and James helped deliver them. Even though he couldn't see, he knew every path in the village by heart. But fate is cruel sometimes. One morning in February, Elara woke up feeling terrible. Not just tired, really sick. Fever, chills, the awful cough that meant the flu had finally reached their house. No, James said when he felt how hot her forehead was. No, not you, not now. Elara tried to get out of bed to make breakfast, but she collapsed immediately. James caught her just before she hit the floor. Mother! James shouted. Mother! Get the doctor! Now! But they both knew the truth. The doctor was sick too. Half the village was dead or dying. There was no help coming. James carried Elara back to bed and sent a servant racing to the next town for medicine. But deep in his heart, he knew it might be too late. The baby was due in 6 weeks. If Elara died now, James refused to think about it. He sat beside her bed, holding her hand, telling her stories about their future together. Remember, he whispered as she drifted in and out of consciousness, we're going to teach our baby to ride horses. You're going to show them the secret spots in the garden where the best flowers grow. I'm going to teach them to be brave. Elara squeezed his hand weakly. She was fighting, but the fever was winning. On the 3rd night, she went into labor. The baby was coming 6 weeks early in the middle of a flu pandemic with no doctor available. Lady Margaret had delivered babies before. It was common for wealthy women to help during emergencies. But this was her daughter-in-law, and the circumstances were terrifying. James, you need to leave the room, Lady Margaret said as Elara's contractions began. No, James said firmly, I'm staying with my wife. This isn't proper. Nothing about our love has been proper, James snapped. And I'm not leaving her now. Elara reached for James's hand. Even in her pain and fever, she wanted him there. The labor was long and difficult. Elara was weak from the flu, and the baby was early. Several times, Lady Margaret thought they were going to lose both mother and child. But Elara was a fighter. She had survived poverty, prejudice, and a head injury that should have killed her. She wasn't going to give up now. At dawn on February 18th, 1919, their daughter was born. She was tiny. So tiny, she fit in James's 2 hands. But she was alive, and she was perfect. Is she? James asked, holding his breath. The baby let out a strong, healthy cry that filled the room with hope. She's beautiful, Lady Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. She has your eyes, James, and Elara's dark hair. James held his daughter for the first time, this tiny miracle who had come into the world against all odds. Hello, little one, he whispered. I'm your daddy, and that brave, wonderful woman over there is your mama. But when he looked toward the bed, his heart stopped. Elara was unconscious. Her breathing was shallow, and her fever was worse than ever. Mother, James said quietly, is she? She's alive, Lady Margaret said. But James, she's very weak. The birth took everything she had left. James handed the baby to his mother and knelt beside Elara's bed. You did it, he whispered to her. Our daughter is here, and she's perfect, but I need you to stay with us. Please, Elara, fight a little longer. For 3 days, Elara drifted between life and death. James never left her side. He held her hand, talked to her, begged her to come back to them. The baby was healthy, thank God. She was small but strong, just like her mother. "What should we name her?" Lady Margaret asked on the third day. James looked at his unconscious wife. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope, because that's what Elara gave me when I thought my life was over." On the fourth morning, Elara's fever finally broke. She opened her eyes and saw James sleeping in the chair beside her bed, holding their daughter against his chest. She reached out and touched his face. James woke immediately. "Elara, oh, thank God, you're awake." She smiled weakly and pointed to the baby. "She's perfect," James said, placing Hope in Elara's arms, just like her mother. Elara looked down at her daughter and began to cry. Happy tears this time. They had all survived. Against every odd, their little family was complete. Spring, 1939. 20 years have passed since that terrible winter. James sits in his favorite chair in the garden, now 50 years old, but still handsome. His hair is silver at the temples, and there are laugh lines around his eyes. Elara, now 42, is still as beautiful as ever. She's working in her rose garden, the same roses she brought to James during his darkest days. And Hope is 20 years old now, the image of her mother, but with her father's blue eyes. She's home from university, full of stories and dreams. "Tell me again how you and Mama met," Hope says, settling on the grass beside James's chair. James smiles. This is Hope's favorite story, and she's heard it 100 times. "Well," James begins, "it was during the Great War. I came home broken and angry, thinking my life was over." As James tells their story, Elara stops her gardening to listen. Even after all these years, she loves hearing him talk about their early days together. Hope has grown up bilingual. She speaks perfect English out loud and perfect sign language with her mother. She's never thought it was strange that her mother doesn't speak. To Hope, love has always been about actions, not words. "The best part," James continues, "is that your mother taught me something very important. She taught me that being blind doesn't mean you can't see what really matters. And what really matters is love." "Are you going to tell her about the letters?" Elara asks in sign language. James grins. "Should I?" "What letters?" Hope asks, looking between her parents. James reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out a small, worn bundle of papers. "These," he says, "are love letters your mother wrote to me." Hope looks confused. "But Mama can't write, can she?" "She learned," James explains. "After we were married, she spent 2 years secretly learning to write. Then she started leaving me little notes around the house. Love letters I could read with my fingers." He hands Hope one of the letters. It's written in simple block letters, easy to read by touch. "My dear James, you are the sunshine in my silent world. I love you more today than yesterday. Your Elara." Hope's eyes fill with tears. "Mama, this is so beautiful." Elara comes over and sits on the arm of James's chair. He reaches up and takes her hand, a gesture as natural as breathing after all these years. "The war is starting again," Hope says quietly. "In Europe. Will you have to go back, Papa?" "No," James says firmly. "My fighting days are over. My job now is to love your mother and watch you change the world." "Me? Change the world?" "Of course." James smiles. "You're going to be a doctor, remember? You're going to help people the way your mother helped me." Hope beams. She's been accepted to medical school, the first woman in their village to even try. "I learned from the best," Hope says, looking at Elara. Mama always said healing comes from the heart, not from textbooks. As the sun sets over Whitmore Manor, the three of them sit together in comfortable silence. James holds Elara's hand. Hope leans against her mother's shoulder. They've survived war, disease, prejudice, and loss. They've built a love that defied every rule and expectation of their time. And they've proven something that storytellers have known for thousands of years. True love always finds a way. James, Elara writes on a piece of paper and shows it to him by guiding his fingers over the letters. Do you ever regret losing your sight? James considers the question seriously. Then he smiles. Never, he says. Because losing my sight helped me find you. And finding you gave me everything that matters. Elara kisses his cheek and writes one more note. I love you too, forever and always. As night falls over Whitmore Manor, their love story continues. Not the dramatic, desperate love of their youth, but the deep, steady love of two souls who chose each other every single day for 20 years. And if you listen carefully on quiet nights, they say you can still hear James reading Elara's love letters aloud in the garden, his voice carrying across the roses that bloom there still.